Hi there, I'm Rosemary Barton. Here's a special edition of At Issue. After weeks of examining top secret documents and talking to dozens of people, David Johnston says a public inquiry into foreign interference is not the answer.
I have found no examples of ministers, the Prime Minister, or their offices knowingly or negligently failing to act on intelligence, advice, or recommendations on the issues I have investigated related to the 2019 and 2021 elections.
The Prime Minister says he will go along with Johnston's decision.
I committed to listening very carefully and abiding by the recommendations that the former Governor General made.
But Pierre Poilievre insists Johnston is not impartial, and this is not the answer.
Conservatives are not buying it. We need a full public inquiry.
So what's to be made of Johnston's decision? What are the political consequences? Let's bring in our panelists, Chantal Hebert, Coyne and Althia Raj. Good to see you all on a Tuesday. Chantal, are you surprised at this decision, and what did you make of the justification for it?
Yes, a bit surprised because pressure for a public inquiry seemed to be so strong that I believed it had become irresistible. I accepted the limits of a public inquiry, but to go from let's not have a public inquiry because everything you really want to know, you can only find out if you have a top secret security clearance, to let's have me do some public hearings is a bit of a leap. I think in the political context, Mr. Johnston probably would have helped himself by recommending that someone else chart the way forward after this.
Andrew?
Well, essentially, he's saying to us, take me up on faith. Take it, trust me. I've seen stuff that you haven't seen, but if you'd seen it, you'd agree with me that all of these multiple reports from intelligence sources are all basically amount to nothing, that the Prime Minister and his cabinet didn't know anything, where he essentially takes them at their word on it. That's fine. That may be the case, but I don't see why people should really necessarily have to take that on faith, particularly when the alternative of a public inquiry was available. He waves it away by saying, well, it couldn't possibly be public in any regard. Well, again, we're just taking his word on it. There's been lots of public inquiries that have had to deal with information, that whether information should be released to the public or not. There are processes for evaluating that. I think this is not likely to mollify any of the government's critics and not likely to engender a lot of public trust in the process.
Althia?
It's like if Mr. Johnston seeks to operate in the sphere that is free of partisanship, and he doesn't realize that he's actually operating in a system that is fueled by partisanship. The easy answer would have been a public inquiry. It is what the opposition wants. It actually would have been better for the government. They get to turn a new page with a new commissioner, put this controversy behind them, start afresh. And if what David Johnston says in his report, that there's actually no wrongdoing, that the government did not fail to act based on political partisan reasons, then why wouldn't they themselves call a public inquiry? I think that is also part of the equation today. I think, seeing where Mr. Johnston is coming from and kind of, thinking back to his past writings, I'm not entirely surprised he went this way, but I am surprised the government decided to accept it.
Well, it's funny because he actually says a public inquiry would have been the easy answer, but not the right one, and would not, in fact, have led to more public trust. Quite the opposite of what you're all saying, Chantal.
Okay, I was never, and I still am not, a public inquiry convert, but going through the motions still matters. And what this does is not going through the motions. I will disagree with Andrew on the notion that he's only saying, take me on trust. He's basically saying, anybody who has access to the same information as I have had will come to the same conclusion. Opposition leaders, opposition MPs, come and read it. But I'm not sure that it will satisfy the need of the public to say, well, the perspective matters, and your perspective maybe is not the one that we trust most.
Andrew?
The best part of the report is the invitation to NSICOP, the Committee of Parliamentarians, or the opposition leaders, if they're willing to be sworn to secrecy, to test and look at his recommendations. The question is, what do they do if they find fault with it? How do they make their case to the public that he's got it wrong if they can't reveal any of the information? So we're kind of in a circular loop here. The Prime Minister, as I've said many times, could disclose all the answers to these questions, could come out in public in a press conference and answer all the questions, or he could answer the questions in a public inquiry. But in each case, he'd have somebody actually probing his answers and comparing them against other things on the record, et cetera, to see whether they stood up. Whereas in this case, he's basically sort of, Father Confessor David Johnston has taken his word for it and basically transcribed it and repeated it back to us, and we're all, again, supposed to take it on faith.
Althia?
Two things. One, I actually do think that an inquiry probably would have access to more information than Mr. Johnston has had. It just, when you start looking, other things tend to pop up, and he doesn't have subpoena powers. So I'm not sure that I agree with that part of his conclusion. But to Andrew's point, the Committee of Parliamentarians that meets behind closed doors, they do issue public reports. So much like this report where Mr. Johnston goes through the intelligence with regards to the media leak and says, well, I can sum this up and tell you what I have found, a little bit like in the Arar inquiry, what came out publicly. That committee can do that, and it has done that. The problem in the past, frankly, is that it has done really good reports, and the government has ignored them. Well, basically ignored them until last March.
So where does this go politically, Chantal, if you all seem to think we haven't moved any further without a public inquiry?
Unless the opposition parties, the NDP in particular, are willing to move this to a non-confidence motion, I think that's probably where we are. I'm not convinced that Canadians would welcome an election on this. There are people who would, but I don't think that that would be a cause to cause a snap election. So I am guessing that some of the parties, maybe not the Conservatives, will take up the offer. I mean, if you're offered to look at the evidence and you say, I don't even want to see it, you also have a problem. There is a challenge here for the opposition parties.
Yeah, potentially a trap even in some ways, Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're still on the high ground of asking for a public inquiry. I don't know why, other than the assurances of David Johnston that it couldn't possibly be public, I don't see why we should dispose of that option. But I think the other wild card in this is what further revelations come out.
Althia.
Well, okay, on the political stuff, what happens is the Conservatives make a lot more money fundraising off of this. But on the other hand, I think, Mr. Poilievre today had a press conference and he talked about how he does not want to be sworn in, and he does not want to see the evidence on which David Johnston has based himself, because that is a trap and that would silence him. Well, if he's the Prime Minister, he has to see this information and he still will not be able to talk about it. So this argument makes no sense to me. And I feel like on the one hand, there is a message there that resonates with the greater public. And on the other hand, there's an uber partisan message that really makes no sense. But that being said, if I was a Conservative, I would be popping the champagne because this is a day to celebrate. It could not have been better than this could not have been better than they anticipated.
Okay, thank you for coming on Tuesday. We will talk more on Thursday, so you'll have to come back, I'm afraid. Thank you. And with that, I'll send things back to Asha in Toronto tonight.